Good morning, everyone. I'm Lee Berry. I'm Vice President of Kerman Communications here in Chicago. And I really want to thank you for being with us today. A few days ago, there was a story teaser in a local newspaper that read, "Here's where CPS and CTU stand on how and when to reopen schools." Which brings us to today's news conference. One group that has yet to formally weigh in on this issue is the principals and administrators of Chicago Public Schools. Today, the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association, which is better known as Cpaa, with 850 members, will offer a well-reasoned solution to the reopening of in-classroom teaching and learning. This solution will elevate the conversation back to higher ground and offer a pathway to success for everyone. School district, teachers, principals, administrators, parents, and most importantly, the students. To launch this framework for success is Mr. Troy LaRaviere, president of the Cpaa. From 2012 to 2015, Troy was Chicago's most awarded principal and led the city's #1 ranked neighborhood school while being an outspoken critic of school privatization, increased standardized testing, school district corruption, and racist policies in the city school system. He is in his second term as Cpaa president. Troy will present the solution, followed by Q&A. If you wish to ask a question, please raise your hand under the reactions icon or write your question in the chat, and we will take questions one at a time. So without further delay, here is Mr. Troy LaRaviere.
Good morning, beautiful people. This is Troy LaRaviere. I am today announcing the principal's plan for reopening schools. It's called R.I.T.E, R-I.T.E, Returning to an In-Person Teaching Environment. It is a simple and elegant plan that solves a lot of problems. But first, I'll give some background on how the plan came about. Unfortunately, from the moment CPS started releasing its guidance reopening schools to principals, our association was fielding calls and texts about problems with the district's plan. In order to get an accurate sense of what was happening, we conducted a survey. And I want to really quickly show you guys a few of the results from that survey. CPS has provided me with sufficient guidance and support on how to make reopening work successfully. 377 principals responded to this survey, and we asked them to agree or disagree with this question. And as you can see, unfortunately, only less than 28% of principals felt that they had guidance, enough guidance and support to make reopening work successfully. Almost half just outright disagreed with the statement. And we also gave principals a chance to comment after each question so that we can get some insight. In fact, there were 562 comments left by 377 principals and assistant principals, and we went through every single one of them. And we chose some that represent the essence of what was said over and over and over again. And those are the ones we'll show you today. There are 200 pages of guidance, but no additional staff to make it happen. We saw that comment repeatedly throughout the survey. We have the staffing needed to reopen our schools safely. And again, unfortunately, only 22% or less than 22% of principals and assistant principals agreed with that statement, and more than half outright disagreed with the statement. And so we saw we were having a problem here. CPS opens positions, but there's no talent pool to draw from. It's every school for themselves. And again, comments like this throughout the survey. I am confident we'll have enough protective supplies and equipment to keep students safe. This measure has actually been getting better over the last 6 months. In surveys in the past, this was down in the 20% range. It's up to 43, but still, unfortunately, it's unacceptable. I told the district one of my staff members got COVID and was in intensive care, but they refused to count it as a COVID case or do contact tracing because she hadn't reported it directly to them herself. How is someone fighting for her life supposed to do that? And so this surfaced another problem, an important problem where you have a credible case of COVID but there's no process for reporting it as a credible case and doing all of the things that need to be done afterwards, like quarantining a part of students or contact tracing. So we have to get some kind of process when there's a credible case. And to date, unfortunately, there is no process to respond to cases like this. Given the resources and plans that we have, opening schools for in-person instruction in January or February is the right decision. Again, this is the last question I'll be showing today. And unfortunately, as you can see, over 64% of principals and assistant principals disagree with this statement that reopening schools in January and February is the right decision. They believe it is not the right decision. So we have a problem here that we felt we have to solve. In the last couple of comments, there's still a lot of questions. I want the kids to come back, but I also don't want to feel like I'm lying to them when I say the building is safe and ready. And so again, we have a member and this is repeated, this idea of lying to our communities and sort of breaching the trust that our communities have with us, repeated throughout the survey, repeated in in-person conversations. Here's a couple of examples. They use our credibility to get buy-in from the community, but when the district's plans fail, it will be my failure in the minds of my communities. We're being told to send letters to parents about schedules that we can't verify will happen. I've worked too hard to build community trust to squander it when they send children to the class and there's no teacher. I cannot sacrifice the relationships I've worked so hard to build. And here's another, and it's the last comment, much like this one. I'm not willing to jeopardize years of relationship building with community, parents, and staff to sell the district's plan while relying on CPS to follow through. When this passes, I have to look at my community in their faces, and I'll have to rebuild, make up, and close the gaps that CPS created. And so again, let us And so we obviously had a problem that we needed to solve. And so after getting input from over 350 school leaders, we drafted a plan. And then we brought 30 principals and assistant principals in, mostly principals, in to stress test that plan, to poke holes in it, to find reasons things that would not work about it so that we can solve those problems that we found, because that's what principals do. That's pretty much our job, at least half the days we're in schools. What we do is solve problems. And so we took this issue with school readiness as a problem and tried to solve it. And the question was, how do we give the children of Chicago the best education possible in this environment? And we figured we can't do that by opposing the district's plan, but by creating a plan that will actually work. And so that's what we came together to do. Instead of fighting a plan that we felt would fail, we decided to create a plan that we felt would succeed. And so the plan is called the R.I.T.E plan. And that's R.I.T.E, returning to an in-person teaching environment. And it's simple and elegant, but it solves a lot of problems. 3 simple steps. And the plan is a little more involved than what I'm about to quote to you and explain, and you'll see much of that in the documentation, but in essence, it's 3 simple steps. Step 1, open a small group of 50 to 100 schools and an in-person pilot, and make COVID-19 vaccinations a priority for the staff in that group. Open a small group of 50 to 100 in-person pilot schools and make COVID-19 vaccinations a priority for the staff in that pilot group. Second, focus the district's human and material resources on ensuring the success of the pilot schools. 3, if successful, expand the pilot every few weeks as groups of schools demonstrate preparedness and readiness for in-person learning. Because as you saw, there were many schools that they were not prepared. And so we have this pilot period. We infuse the schools in that pilot with resources, we evaluate and we expand the pilot. Now that might seem simple, but here's a short list of problems with the current plan that are solved with this new approach. Problem number 1, staffing. Staffing is unstable and unpredictable in many schools, according to the principals and assistant principals who lead them. This plan solves that problem because a phase-in pilot would allow CPS to assess staffing readiness at a small, manageable group of schools and find additional staff for those schools until the staffing situation stabilizes. Problem number 2, there are not enough doses of the vaccine for all school staff. And as we know, vaccinations is one of the sticking points in the CPS-CTU negotiations. This plan solves that problem because the pilot would allow the city to prioritize vaccinations on a smaller group of staff who are part of the pilot. And that would definitely make more teachers want to be a part of the pilot, which will in turn improve and stabilize staffing at those schools. Problem 3, over 400 schools are doing this for the first time with little expertise to lean on within the district. The initial in-person pilot will address this problem by creating a group of peer experts, the folks who are going through the pilot, and in-person learning ambassadors who can be a resource for administrators and staff and their networks in subsequent expansions of the pilot. Now, there are a long list of other problems just like these that this plan either solves or creates a more realistic path for a solution. Now, in order for the district to adopt this approach, they have to come to grips with the fact that their current plan is unworkable. Many of our members presume the district is sincerely believes its plan will work. And in some schools they might. But as you saw, they're not trying to open some K-8 schools. They're attempting to open all K-8 schools. And no matter how sincere the district's faith in its plans is, we need them to understand that their faith does not square with the reality of implementation on the ground in most schools. I don't know any better example of how what the district says to you, the press, is so contradictory to what's happening in schools than yesterday's press conference with the mayor and CEO. And I can talk about that a little later in the question and answer session. But what that press conference showed me is that they are so stuck on believing what they're telling you and so far apart from what's actually happening on the ground that something has to happen to help them to come to grips with the fact that what they're saying is not actually what's happening. They may believe they're telling the truth, but they're telling untruths. You know, maybe they believe it. Maybe they're so far and separated from what we see on the ground as principals that they believe what they're saying, but it's just not true. And so again, what we want to do is open a small group of between 50 to 100 in-person pilot schools, make COVID-19 vaccinations a priority for the staff in that group. 2, focus the district's human and material resources on ensuring the success of the pilot schools. And 3, if successful, expand the pilot every 3 to 4 weeks as groups of schools demonstrate preparedness and readiness for in-person learning. And with that, I'll take questions.
Hi, this is Yana from Chalkbeat.
Hey, Yana.
Hi, Troy. Can you share whether principals have been involved in negotiations or have had any other conversations with the district or the union as there's this ongoing standoff over what an agreement on school reopening would look like?
Unfortunately, first, thank you so much for asking that question. I wish it was a question our district would ask itself. The simple answer to the first part of that question is no, the district has not involved the principals or the Principals Association at all in this planning. And there's something just that does not make sense about that. When you're designing a plan or a process, there's this idea of design thinking or design planning. You get the people who are supposed to use, if you're making a product, you get the people who are supposed to use the product in as a part of the design process for the product so that you can tweak it and figure out if this thing is going to work for their needs or not. When you're designing a process, it's the same thing. You get the people who need to use the process, who are going to engage the process, and on the design of the process. I mean, even the NBA had enough sense to bring the players union in to help design the process that led to the successful resumption of their season. in hospitals. They get the doctors, the nurses, they talk to folks, everyone from the doctors to the nurses to the people who clean the rooms and get them involved. And principals, like we're the ones they hand the plans off to, right? There's no more, we have to make them work in schools. There's no more important group of people to get involved in that process than us. And for some inexplicable reason, the district did not do that and still continues to not consult us. We did have a few conversations with CTU in terms of the latter part of your question. They haven't been extensive. There was one where our members of our governing board at Cpaa had a Zoom conference with several members of several of their officers to talk about areas where our interests or our concerns might overlap and how we might potentially work together. There wasn't a lot of follow-up on that. We did do a joint press conference once where they illustrated or articulated some of their concerns and we articulated some of ours, but that's about as far as it went. Did that answer the question, Yana?
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay, do you any follow-up?
Troy, it's Bernie Tafoya from WBBM News Radio.
Hey, Bernie.
How are you? Have you run any of your plan in front of any of the people at CPS to get a gauge on what they think of this, and if they might be willing to back off and look into your plan a little bit more seriously?
I sent it to them yesterday afternoon, and as of today, I have gotten 0 response. And unfortunately, that is typical of CPS. They typically do not respond until you pressure them to do the right thing. So getting community input, getting community folks to put pressure, talking to elected officials to get them to put pressure on the mayor or the district officials. That's unfortunately, oftentimes we've just had the result to embarrassing the district in order to get them to do the right thing. But before we put pressure on them, before we have to do something to embarrass them, I always reach out directly to the president of the board, directly to the CEO. Board members respond sometimes. The CEO never responds. And I don't know what that is all about. But you know, what we need is for them to take action. And if they don't respond to simple outreach, we have the tools that we need in terms of creating public pressure to get them to act. And we've been relatively successful in that. I wish that was not the route that we had to take, but unfortunately, many times it is. As I said, we are problem solvers. And so if one route doesn't work, we figure out a route that we need to take. And unfortunately, I think we're probably gonna have to do some kind of mass mobilization or organizing to put pressure on the district to adopt this plan.
A follow-up though, do you think that actually I lost my train of thought there. You say you have reached out to the CEO and to the board president on this and have received no response. Do you think
the board president, the mayor's office, and the entire board?
So they've all been given copies of this as of yesterday.
As of yesterday afternoon.
And go ahead.
Go on. Can you hear me?
Sarah, I hear you.
Okay, good. I put some questions in chat because sometimes people don't hear me. I was wondering if you've been able to talk to principals about how hiring the extra 2,000 staff that they've been given positions is going. And then I also have a couple questions after that, but are they being able to find those people to get them in place?
The short answer is no. And I think the one quote that they open these positions, but there's no staff to fill them. There's no support from the talent office. You're the principal and you have all of these other things that you have to do. And making time, principals all across the city making time to interview 4,000 people, and the talent office unfortunately isn't doing much to pre-screen people. I mean, talent offices and other, or HR, the talent office in Chicago is HR, they call it the talent office for some reason. And talent office or HR departments in other cities do so much work on behalf of the principals because the principals are already bogged down with so much to pre-screen folk, to identify potential promising candidates. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening in CPS. But the short answer to your question is no, that principals are not getting very far in staffing their schools. They're not even getting the information they need about who's getting ADA requests approved so that they'll know if they need additional staff, let alone actually being able to hire those additional staff.
My other question has to do with the fact that white students are overrepresented in the students who are returning. And I'm wondering if there would be any concern that this would focus resources on those students. And how would you put the pilot schools? Would they be focused in the neighborhoods where schools are returning? Or how do you see that playing, like where these 50 schools to 100 schools would be?
Yeah, I read you guys the short version. The larger version of the plan clearly states that it should be a representative sample of schools and a representative sample of communities, and so we think that's extremely important. You know, the district often talks about equity as a reason for opening this thing up. Unfortunately, many of the things that they've done don't necessarily line up with that. If I know that, if it comes out of my mouth that I want to reopen these schools because kids are not having access to the internet, many of them can't even log on, and then I give parents the option of opting into in-person learning, and I do that by giving them a survey that they have to access on the same internet that I just said creates the inequity, something is wrong with that picture. If I don't then realize that and then get out there, send folks into those communities where the folks do not have access, to get parents involved, to build trust so that they will opt into in-person learning. And I think that is critical, that we have to do in this iteration what they did not do when they initially got parents to opt in, which was to get on the phone when folks are not. There's some schools where over half the families didn't even complete the opt-in survey. How are we gonna reach out to those families to, one, build some trust, and two, see if we can get them to opt into in-person learning? So those kind of resources and programs and policies have to be put in place in this iteration of the plan. So thank you so much for that question, Sarah. Did that respond to the question?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing, if there are any other questions, one point I want to make before we leave, I have to make before we leave, is about our principals. That, you know, I've heard people's critiques of teachers who oppose the district's plan. And so I want to make two things clear about principals. First, principals and assistant principals have been in schools since March, being a presence for meal distribution, having face-to-face interactions with hundreds and sometimes thousands of students and families to ensure they got laptops for online learning. Sometimes the principal and assistant principal are the only people in the school doing that, and they were doing it at a time when there was no mask requirement, putting themselves at risk, and many of them did come down with COVID. I've got members who go to students' home to help parents troubleshoot laptops to get their kids engaged with learning. Go to their homes. Multiple members do this. So, you know, people try to dismiss teachers' concerns with these, I believe, ignorant statements about teachers not wanting to work, even though they're literally working from home. But no one can say anything like that about principals. Principals and assistant principals were in person before March. They were in person after March. They're in person today. They'll be in person tomorrow and every school day after tomorrow, whether this plan goes through or not. So the only reason they have to raise doubts about the plan is if there's something wrong with the plan. The second thing that needs to be clear about principals is that, unlike teachers, we are the ones who the district hands their plans to try to make them work in over 500 different schools. The CEO and the mayor and Dr. R.I.T.E are not in the schools trying to make these plans work. Principals are. So when these principals, whose job it is to make these plans work in schools, when these leaders start raising serious concerns about this reopening plan, any reasonable person should think, maybe we need to hear these people out and take these warnings seriously.
Troy, I have one other question. It's Bernie Tafoy again. The parents or a group of parents had their own news conference a little while ago. And basically the thrust was, there's nothing wrong. While remote learning is not the best alternative, it's still better than sending kids into harm's way in their view. And they would like to remain in remote learning for the next couple of months and not put everybody in a position of being in schools and possibly exposed, especially with vaccines right around the corner for many teachers. Your thoughts?
So I sympathize with them. I empathize with them. I think that, from one perspective, that is ideal, but I'm trying to solve a problem here, right? That, the truth is that in-person learning can work. When the district says that part, they're right. It can work. It's been shown it can work. What's in doubt is whether the district itself can execute a plan that will make that happen, because certain things have to be in place. And again, I mentioned what happened at the news conference yesterday when Lori Lightfoot and Janice Jackson talked about their plan and how confident they were in it, right? Jackson made this point about if someone in the pod gets infected, we're going to take those pods into quarantine immediately. The same week she said that, the day before she said that, a school in Bridgeport, this happened at a school in Bridgeport, pre-K teacher got infected. She notified the district on a Sunday afternoon. She went into the district's online portal, notified them that she had been infected. Then on Monday, apparently no one was manning the portal on Sunday, because on Monday, the whole pod comes back to class and all these kids who had been exposed to the infected teacher are now being exposed to each other and a new teacher or the substitute teacher. And then later that afternoon, the district finally got word out to parents around 5 o'clock or so that there had been a case, that the pod was going to be quarantined, and then that those kids would not return to school the next day. Later that afternoon, a parent emails the teacher, my quarantine, since the pod has been quarantined, what do I do to get my link for online learning, for remote learning? And the teacher goes, and she says, because I got this, the parent says, I got this email from the district, and the principal goes, can you send me that email? And the reason the principal said, can you send me that email, is because the principal had no idea that one of her pods had been quarantined. And so you have so many problems there, right? You have Dr. Jackson saying that the pods would be quarantined immediately. That did not happen. Again, what they're saying is not what's happening in our schools. The pod was not quarantined immediately. They came back and were exposed again to each other, to other staff members. And then they didn't even tell the principal that they had quarantined one of her pods. So the principal felt like an idiot not being able to respond to this parent. The parent knows before she knows. Like, the district, unfortunately, just has not gotten its act together. And so teachers see stories. And again, I think Lori Lightfoot said that the district was doing the Lord's work in getting schools reopened. And then unfortunately, it's kind of an apt statement, because as we know, the Lord does not work on Sunday. And apparently neither do the people who do the COVID response when someone puts a case into the district's portal, because they did not respond. Those kids came in on Monday, and it was the exact opposite thing of what the mayor and the CEO told you guys yesterday, just one day after this happened. And so parents, principals, and teachers have experienced one experience after another, especially principals. Like, we see mishaps and things falling through the cracks like that day after day after day. We listen to them on their press conferences saying what they may believe, but it's not happening in schools. They need to come to grips with it and recalibrate and consider this plan. And so I understand why parents feel that way. I understand why they can sit there and hear the district make promises and hear the district make assertions that everything's going to be okay and have their doubts, because the district's behavior and the fact that they let so much fall through the cracks fuels those doubts. And so I certainly sympathize with those parents. But again, the plan that we have tries to bring a solution to the fore and create an atmosphere and create a process that's more likely to create a situation in schools where things are safe, create the kind of protocols that are safe, create the kind of guidance that does ensure safety, create a staffing situation that will ensure safety. That's what we're trying to come at it with. We're trying to bring a solution to the table, and we hope the district considers it.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have a question. I'm Leslie Bonio with the Chicago Tribune. It seems like you're describing some pretty consistent communication issues that the district is having. In this context, do you think that any solution is particularly realistic when they are failing to communicate? It seems like basic, cases and things like this.
I mean, it would take a paradigm shift on their part. And I have to say that principal in that school with that pre-K was 100% on board the reopening plan. I talked to her many times. She was one of those people in the 20% that said, we're ready to go. She was 100% on board. And now she has doubts, she has questions, she feels humiliated. She's like, the district just isn't ready. I thought we were, but they're not. Because the district, unfortunately, has this, my way, we'll create the plan, you implement the plan. If they can engage in this paradigm shift and understand that they have to bring the people who have to implement it, the people who justifiably don't have trust in the district because of past behavior, because of current behavior, if they have a parent, have this paradigm shift, open up. Like, if you really want this to work, the number one thing you need is transparency. That's it. Because people don't trust you. When you know you're not trusted, and you know that the animosity, that the doubts are all fueled by people's lack of trust in you, then continuing to come out with statements and messaging and talking points is not going to do the job. You have to open up the process, be transparent, bring people into the process so that they can trust it, sit down with the data together so that you're all looking at the same thing, all asking the experts the same thing, have representatives from each group there so that they can communicate back with the people that they represent, that this is an open process, that I'm learning things here that I didn't think about before, or maybe the district will be learning things because they have to subject themselves to question. But if you open it up and you have that paradigm shift and actually come in with a problem-solving mentality and not a do this, trust me mentality, I think they'll get somewhere. But again, your question, the doubt inherent in your question is justified because there isn't much reason to believe that they'll do that unless we push them to. And so I guess that's what we need to do, to push them to do that. I was on a call with about 150 parents last night, a Zoom meeting, and I told them a little bit about the plan, but mostly I gave them the survey results. And one of the things they were saying is, how can we support this plan? And so there seemed to be a lot of energy into trying to put pressure on the district to do what they need to do. Whether they'll do it or not, whether the pressure will be enough, or whether we'll be able to create the pressure and whether it will be enough remains to be seen. But again, it's a good question. I certainly believe that the doubts inherent in that question are 100% real and justified, and that it is unlikely without massive pressure that they will do what's necessary. But that doesn't stop us from putting the plan forward and trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Lee has his hand up.
Just want to know if anybody else has any other questions.
All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions. If folks want to get in contact with us afterwards, I believe that the folks from Kerman gave you the information that you need. Do Cindy or Lee, is there anything you need to let the press know before we end this?
Sorry for the echo. We've posted a press release on the chat, so please feel free to download it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate everybody for being here. And we'll see if we can take this proposed solution and make it real. Thank you all so much.